Okay. Good evening, everyone. Let's get started. We have a quorum. Okay. Welcome to the City of Newport Beach and the General Plan Update Committee. And let's begin the evening with our roll call. So as I move around the room, I'll call out the names, and if you can say here or not. Nicholas Acevedo, Dennis Baker, Curtis Black, excused absence, Matthew Brady, James Carlson, Jeff Cefalia, Ann Clowerty, okay. Susan DeSantis, Jeremy Evans is an excused absence, Arlene Breer here, David Gooder, excused absence, Lynn Hackman, Laird Hayes, okay. Charles Globe, Ruth Kobayashi, Scott Laidlaw, okay. Katie Love, Anthony Maniscalchi, Thomas Mang, Jim Mosier, Maxwell Pearson, Robert Rader, Harrison Rolfs, Nancy Scarborough, okay. Amber Snyder, excused absence, Debbie Stevens, Graham Wahlberg, Christy Walker, Paul Watkins, Lori Williams, excused absence. Okay. Okay, moving on with our agenda. And public comments on non-agenda items. Mr. Mosher?
Thank you, Chair Greer. I have a comment on something that is related to our agenda, but not on our agenda. As we all know, there are certain land use element amendments that are related to the housing element. They're going forward on a separate track from what we're looking at. Those of us who attended the Speak Up Newport meeting here last night heard that the city staff is again recommending that those amendments go to a green light vote in November. If the measure gets a majority vote, those amendments will become part of the general plan before our other amendments do. If it fails, we were told it would likely go to a court who would have to decide who prevails, the state or the city. We heard there was no case law on that, but actually there is quite a lot of case law, I believe, about conflicts between cities and the state. And it's pretty inconceivable a court would find in favor of our city vote over something that has been repeatedly by the legislature said to be something of statewide importance. So the result would likely be that the amendments would be ratified by the court, and green light might be either wholly or partially invalidated. So the vote really has no significance to it. Either way, the amendments would presumably become part of the general plan. So my comment, which I would like everybody to think about, is why should the city not be considering using the safety valve in green light that allows the council to approve amendments required by the state, which would require paring down those amendments to be just the absolute minimum that actually is required by the state without a buffer, unless there is a buffer required, in which case it would be the minimum buffer. In that case, the council would do that. They could put that on the ballot as an advisory vote, whether the public likes it or not. We could weigh in on it then, but the vote would not be we would not be putting green light in jeopardy unless somebody challenged the council's ability to bypass the vote. And it's unlikely that challenge would come, and if it did, it would be down the road. So it wouldn't put the city into immediate, and the voters who enacted green light in immediate jeopardy. So that is my comment.
Okay, thank you for your comment on
I
non-agenda
don't,
items.
this is not the place to
Not
debate
agenda.
it, but I would just say, I would have a concern about the precedent of ignoring that and letting the council take its vote when it wants to. So.
Right, it's not on the agenda. And so Ben, if you could just note that. Thank you. Mr. Mosher, thank you for your comments. Other public comments? Okay, bring it back to the days, moving on to current business and the meeting minutes of February 7th, 2024. Attachment 1, the draft minutes, and the recommended action to review and approve minutes of February 7th, 2024 meeting. Are there any changes? Recommendations? Charles?
There,
Globe, okay.
I would move the minutes with Jim's changes.
Second is, okay, Dennis Baker, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? None, okay. Moving on to Arts and Culture, Historical Resources Subcommittee, we had our first meeting. Recap Attachment 2, Subcommittee memo with enclosures. The GPAC and Arts Cultural Resources Subcommittee met on February 7th to identify a chairperson and review historical resources, existing conditions, and background analysis. GPAC member Arlene Greer was identified as the chair of the subcommittee, will provide an overview of the subcommittee's discussion and any actions. Attachment 2 includes a cover memo, action minutes with the subcommittee meeting, the PowerPoint displayed at the meeting, and Dudek's report. But I think I'll turn it over to Ben at this point.
Thank you, Chair Greer. Just noting that, thank you for the comments, Mr. Moser. There were some definite typographical errors with identifying the vision statement subcommittee, which we will definitely make those changes as part of the receive and file action if you so do that tonight. I'd go ahead and turn it over to Dudek. We have Elizabeth Dixon, city's project manager from Dudek, and she has a presentation to help frame the review of the historical analysis report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
All right, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Dixon. I'm a planner with Dudek. We've got a slightly larger team with us today. So from Dudek, we have Grant Sless here and Laurie Grover, and then Kearns and West, of course, is a part of the team as well. And we have Jenna and Taylor, who you all know. But let's walk through these slides, and I won't keep you too long, and I know a lot of you have seen these slides through the subcommittees as well. But kind of starting with something that all of you are familiar with, the purpose of these background analyses that we're putting together. We're putting together a background analysis for every element that we're updating, as well as, of course, for the vision statement, and for resilience, which is a topic that was identified by the GPAC. So the purpose of these background reports, these are really the conversation starters. These are intended to act as a baseline of information where we're starting to gather data that's available to us, starting to understand what those existing policies are, and starting to identify some of those initial issues. These are really to help us develop a baseline of understanding, both as the consultant, city staff, and of course with you all. We really want to make sure that these are providing that information that we need, and we do have some initial recommendations within these reports, but these recommendations are really based on those initial data and findings. They're not inclusive of any recommendations that we will have, of course, through the outreach and engagement, both with you and the broader community. And then they're intended to guide those discussions. So the reason that we put these together, in addition to understanding what data is available to us and that information, is so that we can guide our outreach and engagement process. That way, once we have some kind of targeted feedback, we can then craft our policies. All right, and then I know you've seen this as well, but just a little bit of context on the process for these reports. These are going first to the subcommittees. We have identified subcommittee chairs, and will continue to do that as we have these subcommittee meetings. And where there is a request, we're having meetings, which these have been happening. And then the subcommittees, through that discussion, are developing action minutes that we're bringing to the full GPAC, which is what we're doing here tonight. All right, so first I want to start with the historic resources element analysis. So just a little bit of a high-level overview. The historic resources element is not a required general plan element. State law does allow you to include optional elements that are relevant to the city. And this was included in the 2006 general plan update. The goals of the historic resources element, as it stands today, the adopted element, are to protect historically significant landmarks, sites, and structures, and protect archaeological and paleontological resources. So there are a lot of agencies that identify historic resources. So there's a lot of available data on this. One such data source is called the CRIS data source, which is the California Historical Resources Information System. There's a lot of acronyms here. They're all outlined in the analysis. This is not actually a data source that we use for the purposes of a general plan. This is the most detailed data set that's available, but it's just a data set that takes a really significant amount of time and resources to go through. It's about 3 months worth of work just to get all of this data together, and it's not really typical of a comprehensive plan. So the data sources that we do use are listed here as well. So we have the National Register of Historic Places, the California Register of Historic Resources, California Historic Landmarks, the Built Environment Resource Directory, and of course the local City of Newport Beach Historic Resources Inventory. And then just a quick map of going through all of those data resources, what we've identified as sites, landmarks, places that have been identified within these data sources. So we have 25. So this is beyond what's been identified just with the city's historic resources, which with that you see about 10. All right, so through our conversations with the subcommittee, the Arts and Cultural and Historic Resources Subcommittee, we went through kind of a high-level discussion of this document and started getting into that discussion on what are the policies we want to really consider, what are these things that we want to see when it comes to outreach and start to consider with the community. So as much as you can summarize a hour-long meeting into a few bullet points, that's what I've provided here. Some key things that we took away from that is that it's really important to leverage technology for public education. We had some really great input on some resources that are already available. We've got some very creative people on this board who are creating apps that provide guides for historic resources. We had a really great conversation around human history, so oral histories of some notable people here in Newport Beach and what that could look like from a policy perspective. There was also some dialogue about the city's tribal history, and then something that's called legacy businesses, so businesses that have had a significant impact on the city of Newport Beach. There's also a greater conversation about where do we start to hold all of this information in one central place, because there's a lot of groups that are interested in historic resources in Newport Beach, and where can we start to kind of combine our forces. And then there's a couple of recommendations within the analysis related to the Mills Act and certified local government. And these are things that the subcommittee indicated they really wanted to be able to take a deeper dive into these topics. So I have another analysis I'm going to get into, but before I get to that, I want to open it up to the Arts and Cultural and Historic Resources subcommittee members to see if anyone wanted to speak out about the meeting that we had.
Okay, I'll start with that. And we had quite a robust meeting with Paul Watkins, Dennis Baker, and myself. And sorry, Charles Globe couldn't make it, but we'll for the next. And there are some bullet points that you all have in your board packet. And just going over these briefly, we talked about Corona Del Mar and the pocket sites, and that there's a free app to use that Elizabeth touched on quite a bit. And that there's an existing website that catalogs existing and former cottages in Corona Del Mar. And you've touched on the Mills Act and a deeper dive on that. And the group actually discussed the possibility of reaching out to Gary Sherwin of Visit Newport Beach to help us with the outreach and marketing after a policy's been decided for how we're going to reach out into the community and how we can provide input to the residents and visitors of the community. I think one of the most interesting bullet points that I have in this report was basically provided by former Mayor Nancy Gardner, about an umbrella and some sort of a federation to cover all the historical groups that exist in the city that are currently working on maintaining the awareness of the highlighting of historical resources in Newport Beach in all 7 districts. And some of those organizations are the Corona Del Mar Residents Association Historical Resources Group, the Newport Beach Historical Resources, the Newport Beach Historical Society, which I'm a member of the board, is also another organization that is highlighting resources in the city of Newport Beach. And the City Arts Commission is also charged with the responsibility for arts, culture, and historical resources, and they do also provide programming at the library for exhibits and the like to highlight historical resources and share those with the community. And then we decided that the Balboa Island Museum, that we would sort of sidestep that because they have their own format for releasing information to the community. And then we had an idea of policy involving the encouragement of curating oral history, reaching out to former members of the community and leadership and others who might provide with oral histories of the community that will help highlight and make it all that much more interesting to study the historical resources of the city of Newport Beach. We talked about creating a committee for a master plan, like the effort that's been done with arts and culture via the City Arts Commission, and maybe including something in that with historical resources might be of interest to the community and would be able to bring everything under the federation or the umbrella of all the organizations in town that are involved with historical resources. We talked about the city staff's involvement in all of this and how they might help. And we thought that the resources that exist here, meeting spaces in the city at the library and other places such as Marina Park, the Newport Coast Community Center and the like, might be available to those under the umbrella to highlight the historical resources with the residents of the community. And then the group at last discussed the importance of acknowledging Newport Beach as a year-round destination without any season. And part of that is what we're talking about here. So the action would be the GPAC Arts and Culture Historical Resources Subcommittee supporting moving the existing conditions and background analysis report forward with consideration of these action minutes for the larger GPAC to review at the meeting today. So we would love to have your input across the committee before we recommend that action. So who would like to begin or has something that they would like to say? Paul Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. I guess you can hear me, right? So I said to my wife, honey, last weekend I went to the grocery store. Wow. Then I went to the gas station. Wow. Then we went out for dinner. Wow. All those wows are the same ones that I would like to apply and compliment DUDEC on their background analysis on the historic resources. It was really well done. But having said that, there's a lot of stuff that, I mean, every time I turned the page, there was some other great idea. And of course, it starts with a credentialed preservationist that would have to maybe be hired by the city, which is probably a pretty expensive ad. So when we talk about the landmarking process, the paleontological, archaeological, tribal studies, educational opportunities, the historic context statement, and on, ID and identify and preserve legacy businesses, become a certified local government, develop Mills Act program, not that I know anything about that. Just seemed to me that there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. And if we're going to develop goals and policies in our historic resources element, I think we need to give it more than a lick and a promise. I really think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that this is a pretty expensive and ambitious program that we've been, that's been recommended, and which I like in every way, but it does seem to me to be a lot to bite off. So I'm just going to make the comment that it looks like it starts with a credential preservationist at the very least to guide the city through a lot of the goals and policies that are going to be developed as a result of this great background study. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just as a note, when the master plan for the arts was done, there was a consultant hired that helped the process. And so it wouldn't necessarily have to be a full-time hire, but you could get someone, a consultant, to lead us through the process.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And that plan still exists and could be updated, which would save a lot of money. Okay. Any other comments? Mr. Carlson? Oh, Dennis. Mr. Baker.
Yes. I was looking at the list here of historical resources, and there's one missing. Amories with the old canoes and the stuffed shirt. That was recently, in the last couple of years. Pardon me? Yeah. Okay. That was recently in the last couple of years. We got that in the State Historical Society register.
Right.
And it doesn't appear on here.
Just as a reminder, for the resources that the city, works with, it's resources there are resources that exist throughout the state and the county, 1 through 5. But our city, according to the report, identifies and works with 1 through 4. And I know that I had asked in the meeting about the Rex Brandt Blue Sky plaque, and that no longer exists. The plaque exists, excuse me. The plaque is there to remind everyone that Blue Sky did once exist, but the building itself is not there. But Anne Marie's, did we just neglect
I think
to have that on our list of in that?
Check into it because we got that done.
Okay, all right. Ah. Oh, it was called the stuffed shirt back then, and then it was Kano's, and then Anne Marie's.
I apologize.
Right. I know, I get noticed all the time that things exist. Okay. Others? Thank you for that comment, Mr. Carlson. Thanks. Dennis Baker.
I assume, though, that this is a dynamic list. It's not going to be frozen next week or something. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct. And the city does have its own internal policy and procedure for identifying local historic resources, but at the same time, other agencies have their processes in place where other historic resources could be identified.
Keep in mind the graph that has us not the graph, but the page that Elizabeth put up that has us basically receiving all of the report from DUDAC, which is the consultant, then it going to the subcommittee, and then, to city staff, and then, to council. But then things will always be repeating themselves again and again as we come into this meeting room and look for more input from people that are from the greater committee. Have I said that correctly, Ben?
Sure, yeah, just to emphasize, this is a conversation starter. It's not intended to restrict or commit this committee to anything. You might go out to the community with outreach and maybe there's a total disregard for historical resources, whether you like it or not. But at least you have that information and you can kind of make an informed decision on potential policy recommendations as we move further on into phase 2 and beyond. So I think Committee Member Laidlaw had a comment as well.
These bullet points are markers, so we forget along the process that we did have a marker back then for, say, for example, something that you offered during this meeting. And then you'll be in charge of that with the staff. Thank you. Mr. Laidlaw?
Thank you. And maybe it's a question for Ben, but having been involved in rehab of various historic buildings in Newport Beach, is it within the committee's purview to comment about how we would like to see actual processing handled to protect these resources? Because we don't necessarily, we're not saying that these resources can't be touched, right? And so I just haven't heard anything about how we maintain and or encourage, the preservation of these resources, within a commercial environment.
I can maybe answer that a little bit, and maybe with Nancy, with us having both been involved with the Environmental Quality Affairs Committee. Every time we had a DEIR, we had paleontological resources. And Just looking at this overview that was provided by DUDEC, the city and the committees that I've served on and the Arts Commission, they've gone to great lengths to make sure that those historical resources are preserved and the tribal communities are involved, you know, with identifying them and making sure that they end up in the right places for us to be able to see them maybe at a later date.
I just, since you mentioned me, Committee Member Laidlaw, I think it's fully within the GPAC's purview to recommend policies on how to deal with various levels of historic or potentially historic resources, kind of how the current historical resources element does. I think it categorizes things into different classes, a class system, and different classes have different implications from a potential, tear down or remodel standpoint. So I think it is fully within the committee's purview to make a policy recommendation on how to deal with these various structures.
Yes. Mr. Maniskovsky?
Thank you. Okay, thank you. What is the city's threshold in determining historical significance on a piece of property? And I speak to Mr. Laidlaw's question as well. I mean, is it 50 years and all of a sudden it's that significance and they take a hard look at it?
Yes, so, and I might be corrected over by our technical consultants there who have a better handle, but I don't believe the city has a specific threshold per se. It's really, the state, California Environmental Quality Act, if I understand it correctly, makes us look more closely at buildings that are 50 years or older. Is that right? Okay. So 50 years or older, and then we have to give it a little bit more scrutiny to see if it's a potentially historic resource that could be compromised through the proposed project.
Mr. Mosher?
Yep, thank you, Chair Greer. In reviewing this before the meeting, I noticed the action tonight is for the full committee to receive attachment 2 to guide the initial outreach efforts, rather than discussing what are good historical policies, if I'm understanding it. But I was a little confused because reading the background report, part of attachment 2, I didn't find much in it that had to do with initial outreach. It had outreach recommendations, but they were for policies that would go potentially into the general plan for future outreach after the plan is adopted. And what you said about the committee meeting made a little more sense in the terms of immediate outreach. But many of those bullet points also seem to be recommendations for future policies, such as incorporating historical sites on the MyNB app and more wayfinding signs to historical sites. Those would be future policies. They're not immediate outreach. So I am curious how the background report is actually informing the initial outreach. It sounded like the feedback from the committee did to some extent, but I don't actually see how the background report is doing that. So are we going to be asking, for instance, to Tony's point, are we going to asking people how old do they think something should be before it's historical? I myself live in a house that's built in 1959, so it's 65 years old, ready for Medicare, but I don't know that anybody would think it was particularly historically significant, and I'm sure many other people live in homes even older than that. And are we asking them, we're not trying to educate them about the list of identified, but are we asking them what other sites they think should be at this point? Or I'm confused about how this is informing the initial outreach, which is what we're saying it should be used for.
I think one thing it does.
Elizabeth?
Hold on just a minute. I think one thing it does is we take some of this information. So if you had a group there and were having questions, do you feel it's worth spending city resources on plaques to identify? I mean, you could be very specific about it, and that from that kind of question, you get a sense of whether the city residents really feel, oh, this is something important we'd like to have energy spent there, or if they were going, no, why? Then maybe you don't have any effort on that. So I do think it informs the outreach.
So can we ask DUDEC how they're planning to use it? Will they say this is a suggested policy? Do you think it's a good policy? What are you going to do during the outreach?
Yes, absolutely. So part of the conversation around policy, it's going to happen naturally. It's been happening even here today. It's happened with these subcommittees. And what we want to do is we want to go to the community and bring maybe policies, but more likely language around those policies. So it may not be, here's this exact policy language, do you like it or not? But we'll start to ask questions that relate to those policies to then say, okay, is this something that we want to commit to for our draft general plan? So something to that effect.
Good. And then for the other kind of outreach, I agree with Paul Watkins. Some of the recommendations seem pretty ambitious, and I find it unlikely our city council would be creating a historical resources commission or something of that sort. So how are we going to get the feedback from the upper level as well as from the community as whether we're going in a viable direction that is going to be ever adopted or approved?
Well, that will be, some of this will be included in the report I make to council. And just as when I said that we wanted, there had been discussion of sustainability element, and the council, at least one or two of them said, no, we're not interested in that. The same thing we can do here as we move along and start to, I'm not going to do it now doesn't make any sense, because they won't either know what the public reaction to it is. But once we see where the public stands after our outreach, then to go to the council and say, this is what GPAC is recommending, this is what the basis of it is based on outreach, then they can say, well, that's very nice, but no, or okay, that's interesting, let's proceed along those lines.
How active is our historical constituency here in Newport Beach?
You have several, which is, I think, one of the problems, but the ones that are involved are very passionate about it. I don't know myself how deep, whether it's just a very thin layer of passion or whether it's actually supported. And I think that's why the outreach will be important, to just see what the depth of it is. I think as from a political government point of view, we've been pretty indifferent, I think.
Good. I'm not looking to layer, in fact, my opinion would be, I'm not looking to layer an additional personnel, a historic officer as part of our structure in the city. It only complicates things. So, I mean, we've all been part of this historical or hysterical societies from time to time, and they're not always easy to work with. So I would not be an advocate of having a dedicated officer.
That's the discussion here, but I think that's one of the reasons that I've been feeling that if we could get all of them together and work together, including Sherman Gardens and that sort of thing, and have more of a federation so they're speaking more with one voice, I think that would also be easier than to have dialogues and come to be able to deal with these issues instead of trying to deal with Babel Island on this thing and then, that sort of thing. But that's why we're having a discussion. If you don't want to have, that's part of it, of our comments.
And we have a lot available that surrounds us in our sphere of influence with educational institutions who would probably we could probably find within those institutions people to help us, with what we're doing. If it reaches that point and a policy's been developed, to have a preservationist involved with what we're doing at the different layers. But just remember, today we've heard from DUDEC. We started with the understand, and the report was put out for you all to read, enjoy, and have your input here. Now we're going to be proceeding to the point with outreach and reaching out into the community. We've already had our committee meeting. We've already had our conversation. Yes. Mr. Betancourt? Yes.
I thank you for your time. As someone who has toured the Newport Banning Ranch with many of you in this room, in fact, I don't see the coastal gun emplacement on the dot map, and I may be reading too much into that because there are any number of Indian gathering places there. I served as the monitor to take the tribal monitor when they researched, but I don't see them in there. And maybe some of that material is not published.
Banning Ranch?
It's available, but I know I have tried to help others out with that before, and I'm still available to do that within
Thank you.
And
Elizabeth will take that note. Thank you very much for offering that. Very fruitful. Thank you.
Well, we're just making the point that Banning Ranch isn't in the city, actually, so.
That's right.
And if I may say, I've been doing a lot of research into my family's, my husband's family history here in Newport Beach and all of that. And if we do not do things to preserve it, it disappears. And yes, maybe, we have to be careful about how much money we spend, but history does inform us about where we were, where we're going, and what potentially the future is. And I think, I just want to make that point, that we have to do the work to hold on to history and save it for our next generations. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, any other comments from the committee? Committee, Dennis Baker.
Yeah, everything that I've heard so far has been specifically to a physical structure or this type of thing, but I'm curious where businesses fall in. So obviously, some of them are obviously physical structures too, but for example, the Balboa Ferry. So that's a business also that has a long history besides the physical ferry. Another example, though, that may not come on a radar screen is like Ruby's, right? Ruby's been there forever, a restaurant. So you have a commercial retail business, but it's really a part of the community and it has a long history. And we have had certain things that have come through and we've lost, like Coco's or stuff like that, or it's changed radically. So I'm just wondering if to me, the businesses are part of the history. There's businesses that have been here a long time. Again, I don't know whether it's 50 years or 20 years or whatever. And perhaps one or two of our boat yards might fall into that too. They're historic businesses. So I'm kind of thinking about, does the business community come in here someplace? And if so, in what way? Or not? And then we don't worry about it.
Again, that could go under the umbrella, basically that we're talking about, or a federation of different historical societies within the city and in our committee as well. So that would be something. I'm making some notes here. I'm sure Dudek is doing the same thing, and Benwell. And then we have another comment from Debbie Stevens, Corinne Del Mar.
Thank you. I'm not on the committee. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Quick comment on the tribal cultural stuff. You got to be really careful with what you publish. Yeah, I know, but that's why you may not see detailed stuff on Banning Ranch or whatever. It's you can't publish a lot of their stuff. You have to have their approval. So, okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is something that the staff is listening to, what's happening in the room and with the committee, and find a vehicle for highlighting that. Even though it is not in the city, we still do have tribal resources in the city as well that I know were uncovered, during various buildings that have been erected and resources moved to other burial sites.
I have a comment if we have just
okay,
one.
And then we'll move on. Mrs. Scarborough.
I know that there is discussion and a designs concept being tossed around right now that is not public about the McFadden Square and the pier. And so I think that part of what we need to have here is that there needs to be some method for public input into those kinds of projects. I just think that, to have a written document is one thing, but if there's something like that there's a design concept, change is good. We need to, refurbish that area. It's really run down. But I think that the community should have something to say about what components of that are kept and changed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, the timeline was changed, since 2006. The City Arts Commission added to it, and it was updated. But I think you're referring to the McFadden Square?
Yes.
And that, right, the historical resources. And the pier, right. Well, we're adding it to the list. Thank you. And I think Mr. Mosher mentioned that as well in his comments. Okay?
One
Any
more
others? And then
thing.
because we still we have our other committee. We'll have public comment yet. Ben, do you want to have public comment right after each one of these? Okay, public comment, and then we'll have to cut it off and move on to the next item on the agenda. So we cover everything this evening. And would you like to give that comment if you
Yes,
keep it brief? Thank you.
I just happened to notice that Lido Island, it has the clubhouse there, which my husband's grandfather built. It was one of the first structures on Lido Island, and that bridge came after, actually. And so I think that should be on your list, okay?
Okay. That's been, I understand, received and filed, Ben?
No, I just, it seems like at this point, if the committee doesn't have any further comments, that you're ready to receive and file this as, again, a conversation starter and not the end-all be-all. So, Chair, if you want to.
Okay. Yes, let's move on. I appreciate all the comments that have been made here in the room and the input that we've received from everyone. It's been noted, and it will be noted in the minutes. And now the GPAC Arts and Cultural Historic Resources Subcommittee is in support of moving the existing conditions and background analysis report forward with consideration of these action minutes for the larger GPAC to review. And we did that just now at the meeting. So I don't think we need a motion to do that, Ben. Just everyone in agreement. Are there any objections to moving it forward with a progress report, which is what we're recommending here, be posted up on the website? Is that correct? Okay. Any objections? Okay, great. We'll move on then to the next item on the agenda. And the next item is item C, Recreation, Natural Resources, Harbor and Bay, and Safety Subcommittees recap. Attachment 3, Subcommittee memo with enclosures. Ben, do you want to capture that for us?
So, sure, I'll try to be very brief. I know some of you have to leave at 6, so. So very much like the last item, this is related to the resilience topic report, which is very large, and so I applaud all the subcommittees for getting through that. Very much like the last one, we're going to have Elizabeth provide a brief overview as to what the resilience report covers, and then we'll have the various chairs of those subcommittees provide some input, as well as any of the larger GPAC members. I will note that Kurt Black was identified as the chair of the Harbor and Bay subcommittee. He cannot be here due to a work commitment, but he indicated that someone's prepared to kind of respond in his place. So anyway, with that, I would go ahead and turn it over to Elizabeth at your pleasure, Chair.
Thank you, Ben. Elizabeth?
All right, thank you. And I'll try to be brief because we have some outreach updates as well. So just a little background context on this. We originally came to the GPAC back in July to discuss the resilience analysis. And this analysis covers 9 specific topics that were identified by the GPAC. So these topics are not inclusive of all things related to resilience. We did have some comments on the document where there's additional information that some members are looking for, things like marine-related uses. Those are going to be covered in the other analyses, such as the Harbor and Bay element analysis. So just a little bit of context for these 9 topics. We've got the 9 topics here on the left side of the table. And along the top of the table here, we have all of the required or state-mandated general plan elements. You may recall this if you can remember as far back as July. I don't know that I would, but you have seen this before. And what we're really highlighting here is where these topics are explicitly required within state law to be addressed within each of these elements, and where there is guidance from the Office of Planning and Research. And I just want to give a couple of notes here. Conservation in the city, you call that your natural resources element. And then open space, that's primarily addressed through your recreation element. So if you're looking at those elements and you're saying, wait, we don't have those, you are addressing them in other ways. All right, so I'll just go through each of these 9 topics with some high-level findings. So first, with coastal hazards, we're seeing that flooding, beach and cliff erosion are expected to intensify. There are maps that you will see in the report if you want to see where that's anticipated to occur based on various scenarios. And there are some documents already within the city that are addressing some of these topics, but we did hear from the committee that we're looking for some stronger measures, specifically some proactive strategies that are not necessarily reactive. In terms of education, There's a lot of information on the city's website. There's information going out through various social media platforms, but there are no adopted resilience or sustainability education policies within the current general plan. And education as it relates to the general plan is it's required to be addressed within the safety element, but through this it may expand to other elements. Next we have buildings and development, and this is really related to kind of green building design. What we're highlighting within the report is that the Title 24 California Green Building Code standards are actually very high, but where you may want to consider policies for enhancing green building design could be related to rehabilitation of existing structures. All right, as it relates to transportation, increased safety could promote other modes of transportation being utilized, and really for transportation in terms of resilience, you really don't want to separate this too much from land use. They're very interconnected, so something to consider moving forward. In terms of waste reduction, you are, I'm sure, are familiar that there are new organic waste collection requirements, and that there are requirements coming down from the state that are being implemented in the city, and that there may be room to focus policy around education here. In terms of energy, the current energy mix, about 35% of that is renewable, and it's expected to go up to 96% by 2050 within Orange County. And we did have some conversations around policy and outreach focused on electric vehicles and the availability and maintenance of charging stations. In terms of water conservation, the city is below its water use targets, so that's good news. And then if there is some policy focused around potential improvements, there's potentially room for that in terms of reducing water for irrigation, because about 18% of the water use goes to irrigation. All right, and then recreational water quality, as you would expect, water quality declines during and post-storm events, and that's primarily due to runoff that has contaminants. And then we did have a conversation about this, but there is some potential mild copper contamination. The average is lower than the US EPA limit, and we had some conversation about whether or not it's actually a concern. And then finally, the ninth topic here, urban outdoors. We've got some statistics here for you, but I think one thing that's important to consider is that, you know, as the population increases, while the city has a lot of park space, we may want to look at parks in terms of accessibility. So making sure that people can be connected to their parks. All right, so I'll move us on. I know I touched a little bit about the conversation that we had, and again, this was probably, I think this was about 2 separate hour-and-a-half meetings. So as much as you can fit from that meeting into some bullet points, I think that I got most of it here, but we'll let others speak out. But we heard a lot about planning for adaptation strategies with an increased focus on natural mitigation measures. And a lot of the coastal conversation we did have with our coastal engineer, Patrick, who was at these meetings. He just wasn't able to make it here tonight because he is under the weather. But we were able to keep that dialogue going, and he'll be able to continue to be involved in this effort. The groups want to see more coordinated efforts, so there may be partnerships through places like UCSD, and start to gather some good data on the front end. There's a strong need for input from the residents of Balboa Island, especially as it relates to flooding. There was a pretty great conversation about drought-tolerant landscaping and the need for reducing water use through this type of landscaping. We had a conversation about electric vehicle usage, including city EV fleets as well as charging stations. There was a conversation which I thought went really well. There's a desire perhaps to change the harbor and bay element to the harbor, bay, and beaches element. There is erosion along and beyond the coast, so a lot of the data that we've captured within the analysis is really only along the coast, but not beyond the coast. And we had conversations about water quality, and there was a conversation about a potential goal related to increasing water quality so that shellfish could be consumed, because some remember that when they were younger that they were able to consume shellfish from the local waters. And then conversations around extreme heat. So I hope that wasn't too fast. I just, for the sake of time, wanted to keep us all on track, and I want to open it up to any of the subcommittee members. I know there were a lot, so if anyone wants to discuss anything from those meetings.
Anything? Any comments?
Yeah.
On the committee?
I've got one.
Charles Globe.
Thank you. On number 7, water conservation, we've been struggling for several years to get traction in the city to advance the distribution of recycled water. And it'd be nice to have a policy in there that gave it some teeth, because the staff says there's nowhere that anybody says we care about this, so getting traction to do it is difficult. And we have the Irvine Ranch Water District that serves Newport Coast offering us purple pipe water and offering to bring it to Fashion Island, and we can't talk to them about it for some reason because there's nobody interested.
Thank you. Nancy?
I'll weigh in.
Nancy
just
Scarborough.
briefly. One of the things that we talked about was how we would be able to monitor these things. The general plan progress report, that's the annual report, usually focuses on the housing element, and we felt that that report needed to, either on an annual or biannual basis,
I'm going
touch
to bring it,
other
that'll come up.
elements. Oh, it will? Okay, okay.
Mr. Laidlaw?
Is there any way within the resiliency component to address, so Newport Beach is stuck, right? Everything inland from us comes through us to get to the bay or the ocean. So on the water quality front, you know, I was thinking, I'm having conversations with people, and this comes up, the water quality thing comes up a lot with people, but we have the Santa Ana River that dumps right into us, and that's all county property. I mean, we don't have control, you know, over all that water dumping into and then filtering down to our beaches. So is there some way where we can at least be outspoken about that? I mean, it would be wonderful someday if there was a giant way of cleaning that water before it made it to the beach.
The city has made some efforts. I mean, we're part of the, for example, the Newport Bay Executive Water Quality Committee, which works with the inland cities and trying to get them, and they all put money in. I mean, obviously, unless we're really nagging at them, they've got other issues and they don't care. The Santa Ana River, I do think the city could do more to coordinate with upstream, because there are groups that are doing a lot of stuff on water quality, particularly up in Corona and San Bernardino areas. But there's always been a realization that yeah, that we're the end of the toilet. Yeah.
Dennis Baker?
Yeah, to expand on that a little bit, and she touched on it, there's actually for 25 years or so, there has been the Newport Bay Watershed Committee, which is a countywide, and it involves the Irvine Company and a lot of other entities, and it involves a lot of money. It isn't just a group that sits and talks. It's commitments of money to spend money upstream and so on. There's two sources of our pollution. You mentioned the Santa Ana River. Santa Ana River, what we get from that is what blows out the Santa Ana River and then goes up or down the coast. Some of it goes to Huntington. We get some of it. But then we have a 145-mile watershed that is feeding down into our upper Newport Bay and bringing stuff down. And over the years, there's been what I consider a tremendous amount of work that's been done on that. The problem is tremendous too. So to your point, yes, we're doing that, and I would like to see that captured in some way in the general plan. I don't know whether the fact that we are doing it or to continue doing what we're doing or so on, working with our upstream neighbors, because obviously we are at the end of the pipe. but thanks for mentioning that.
Thank you. Other comments? Mr. Mosher?
Yeah, one thing I noticed in today's presentation, some of us were looking through the handout here, which is the presentation presented to the two committees, and I noticed the resilience findings slides have been updated. They seem to be evolving. So the original slides were, I guess, findings taken from the background report. So is the background report being revised, or how are we keeping track of our evolving findings about resiliency?
Yes, so a couple of things. I updated the slides to make them more concise. So it's not different information, but we did make some revisions to the report. I was given some specific revisions from Dennis that I incorporated, and I'm trying to recall if there were any other revisions. Oh, I provided some clarifying revisions in the, as it relates to the Cal Green building standards.
If no further comments, are we ready to, one more? Okay, Susan DeSantis.
I wanted to focus for a minute on those areas of the city that are adjacent to fire hazard zones. And I feel that it hasn't been addressed adequately. And there may be some solutions that may be of value, in particular because of the cost of insurance rising as significantly as it has. Solutions that may not have been considered in the past may be important today, and one such solution could be looking at what's called fire hardening, which is removing moisture from the trees. So I would request that we take a look at that as a possible policy, and other opportunities for improving the safety of those communities who may be moving away from having full replacement value coverage because of the cost escalation that's happening right now.
That is happening up in the Newport Coast community, right? Thank you, Susan. That's a great.
Yeah, thank you, Committee Member DeSantis. I just note that the safety element will have its own specific report, which I think may delve into that a little bit more deeply. So that has yet to be addressed because we're not quite there. But your comment is well received, and we'll make note of that.
And we can bring that back over and over again, because remember, these are progress reports. The approvals that we're asking be posted on the website. And so it can be brought up again and remind everyone, just as you had said. And public comment. Now, are we going to, before we move away from the committee, Mr. Mosher, can you make that one brief, and we'll move to the public comment on these committees' recommendations? Go ahead.
Yes, I just had a sort of overall comment. One of the previous conclusions we've made from the resilience background report was to accept the recommendation from DUDEC that there not be a separate element, but that the resilience policies be sprinkled about the other elements of the general plan. And the comment I wanted to make is, again, about an organizational aspect of it like that. And I would like to offer the somewhat radical suggestion that the decision in 2006 to put some of these policies in separate elements may be something that GPAC may want to reconsider. Some of these things have been put in, for instance, the harbor and bay element, separate from the land use element. Some things have been put into an arts and culture element, which sounded good in 2006. But I've attended the Harbor Commission meetings since I think 2011. I've never heard them refer to the general plan in considering anything. So I don't know how much impact those policies have. And I do not recall the Library Services Department ever actually referring to the general plan and making a decision. So the GPAC may want to rethink whether those should be standalone elements or not. Thank you.
I guess a comment to that would be that, part of the broader conversation is what the implementation program of the general plan looks like at the end of the day, which could have very measurable performance kind of indicators as to how the city's doing on these various policies and how they should be implemented. So I think your point is well taken that maybe if you scatter them out, they might be diluted, but there might be another way to call them out in the implementation program as a single sort of, component in resiliency. So just something to think about.
Thank you, Ben. And if no further comment from the committee, we'll take oops, Dennis?
Yeah, briefly, actually it's been covered. I do have a report from Committee Chairman Black, but the items that he has listed have been covered, so I'm not going to take the time to go over them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Public comment?
Hi,
There was one before you too, but that's fine. Okay. Do you mind waiting for a moment, unless you have to leave?
Okay, all right. So I've gone to the Water Quality and Tidelands Committee, and I believe it was maybe the last one or the one before, they discussed the fire hazards of, along the cliffs, and that in order to reduce their insurance costs for fire, they had sprayed some type of retardant there, but it actually had a component that was like a fertilizer, so the growth that came back was even more growth along the side of the cliff. And then the other problem that was concerning is the rain would wash this into the bay, and then we'd have more algae growth that we don't want. The other point was that they were recommending that they exchange the screens in the vents in your house so that they were finer, so that the ambers couldn't get into the house, which is one of the reasons the houses burn. And especially if we're encouraging people to put the solar panels on their roofs, sometimes they will need to improve their roof. They could actually put that in at that time, or it could be a recommendation that all new buildings or all new construction should have those finer screens to prevent fire.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
You were talking about water quality, and I do know that the city of Newport Beach is really ahead of the game. Over there going into the back bay, they're building a water wheel. I don't know if you know about the water wheel, what that is, and I go by it all the time, and I'm inspecting the construction. What it is the water comes down through into the back bay, but the water will go through it, and the water wheel will pick up any of the stuff and to get rid of it. And the city is really ahead of the game, because I know people from out the world, and they never heard of anybody doing a water wheel, so we are above it.
Thank you. Very interesting. Okay. All right. If there is no further objection, are we ready to receive and file attachment number 3 to guide the initial outreach efforts for the GPAC Recreation, Natural Resources, Harbor and Bay and Safety Subcommittee? Any objections? Okay, Ben, file it. Thank you. All right. Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda. Committee report announcements or matters which members... Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my goodness. Excuse me. Presentation overview of upcoming deliverables and objectives, and we have Dudek here for that. Okay?
Great. I'm Jenna Troje Maldonado with Kearns and West on the Dudek team. I'm going to share briefly about the outreach and engagement updates with folks, knowing that we're tight on time, but want to make sure that we're communicating this well. So just as a reminder, in terms of the outreach, we are launching this week, and so we're really excited to get feet on the ground and information out to folks. As a process reminder, we met with the outreach subcommittee to confirm the pop-up locations, priorities, messaging, came back to the GPAC, coordinated pop-up events with the points of contact that were identified with the outreach subcommittee and the GPAC. We developed our draft communications materials alongside the city's PIO, the Public Information Officer, John Pope, who made sure that we were within the city's language and style guides and all those materials that the city maintains. And then we shared draft materials with the outreach subcommittee for review of the style and colors, and now we're implementing the outreach and communication strategy. So just to review the process. In terms of notifications, the first notification that went out is the city manager's update. It went out last Friday. And it's, of course, as it is every week on Stu News. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in terms of our website views and metrics that we're tracking. Upcoming this week and next week are newspaper ads in the Daily Pilot and Stu News. They'll be running for the next, I think, month or two, so you'll see that both in print and online. The city will have social media posts. There'll be a postcard or mailer mailed out to residents, and then we'll have ongoing emails to the general plan update interest list as well. In terms of metrics, we always want to make sure that we're communicating back some of the metrics that we are seeing now. So the first launch of public information that went out was the city manager's update, and we did see a huge spike on Friday when that information went out. We had about 1,000 views. We're looking at about 475 unique visitors, meaning folks spent time on the page as well. And we had responses on the survey map that was online. One thing I'll note is that we received the biggest spike, and the two things that happened, the city manager's update, and then that update also on Stu News, the spike was from the email from the city manager to folks, and a smaller spike from Stu News. Why I bring that up is that we're going to be really vigilant about seeing when information goes out, when advertisements go up, and just make sure we're moderating what we're doing to get the highest impact. One way we can track things is looking at how many people visited the website, but as a note, that step of actually visiting the website is an active participation in the general plan. And so there's the people who receive information and then those who take the action to learn more as well. And then our pop-up events. Most of these are confirmed. We have one tentative. The first is actually this weekend at the Mayor's Egg Race. We'll be sharing a little more information out about that. We'll be at the Newport Beach Farmers Market on March 31st. The Environmental Nature Center at the Native Plant Sale on the 13th. The Corona Del Mar Farmers Market on the 20th. The library, tentatively Monday, April 22nd from 3 to 5, so in the afternoon. The Balboa Island Art Walk on the 19th of May, and then looking at Battle of the Bay on May 22nd. So I want to thank the GPAC committee members who have been really helpful in making sure these are scheduled. There's been a couple other suggestions that it could be that city staff or others cover those pop-up events, but just wanted to note these are the ones that are confirmed. What you'll be receiving, and I'll note for the Mayor's Egg Race that's happening this week, you'll be receiving the first of what we're calling like the one-pagers. They might be 2 pages, but 1-pagers for the GPAC, which will include information on the pop-up event, the activities that are going to take place, a description of those activities, the role of the GPAC if you did attend, and you'll receive one of those. Our goal is to have those a week or 2 in advance for all of the pop-up events. You're going to receive it tomorrow morning for the Mayor's Egg Race, as this is our first one and we're getting it up and running. You're also going to get an overview packet of messaging, materials, all of those pieces. So along with that one sheet, you'll also get graphics and social media messaging that you can share out with your communities, with your families, with your neighbors. So you'll have, I'll say, like a GPAC toolkit, so almost like a media toolkit, but for the GPAC. At the Mayor's Egg Race, we'll have our informational banner for folks to get to know the general plan update. We'll have an activity with a QR code for folks to access Newport Together to have that online engagement. And then we wanted to reflect something that was a little bit like an egg race. We're going to be doing rock painting, asking kids what their favorite thing about Newport Beach is or their neighborhood, really get it down just to that language of folks to think about what they love about Newport Beach and what they'd like to see in their neighborhood. Again, this is really vision-y. And then we'll have a Polaroid station for folks to take pictures with their rocks. They can take them home or we can collect them. We'll see this activity a couple times, but this is the one that we're going to be doing for the Mayor's Egg Race on Saturday. And I'll just pause here if there's any questions. Yes.
I have a question. Just, did the outreach committee review, at least in concept, the ads and that sort of thing?
Yes,
Any of these materials?
Yes, they were sent to the outreach.
Thank you.
Is the April 22nd Central Library pop-up in coordination with some event on that day, or just at random? And which end will it be, since the parking lot is kind of out of commission now?
Right. So I will confirm with my team on that, but it is not in coordination with a specific event, but we asked for them to, we've been in close coordination with the library about when this best specific times for folks to come. So the events that are coming up have a smaller attendance than some of the Monday or Saturday attendance by folks. So we have a pop-up on a Saturday, so we're gonna go on a Monday to get a different audience. We know about the construction. I believe we're coordinating with the library to make sure that there's going to be like a half an hour overlap with some construction, but we'll be there for, I think, 3 hours at the peak of when folks come to the library. But we're basing our attendance on the highest attendance that the library tells us.
You might want to coordinate which entrance is having the most activity.
Yes, and we'll take direction from the library on that because that will be really important.
We gave some warning on that to Ben, so I'm sure he's been working behind the scenes as well. Yeah. On behalf of the committee, the GPAC committee, I'd like to thank you for all of your work on the subcommittee presentations and your outreach, your overview that you just provided for upcoming deliverables and objectives. Do you have anything more to add? Okay.
We just have one more slide.
All right.
So next steps, just the reports that are going to be coming your way, and Ben will be reaching out to schedule meetings, but the Arts and Cultural and Historic Resources Subcommittee will be receiving the Arts and Cultural Element Analysis for review. The Recreation and Natural Resources Subcommittee will be receiving both the Natural Resources and Recreation Element analysis for review. Ben is going to be coordinating with the Noise Element Subcommittee for a discussion there. And then, of course, with these pop-up events that Jenna went over, this is an open invitation to all the GPAC members. So as she mentioned, you'll all be getting some communication guidance, and we certainly hope that you stop by, and you're welcome to hang out for a little bit, and we hope to see you. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Arlene?
Yes?
March 31st is Easter. Is that going to, and the farmer's market's still going and all that kind of good stuff? Just wondering. It's okay.
Yeah, they actually recommended that date.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess they have to have their vegetables for their noon meal. Right, exactly. Okay. All right, Ben, is there anything else, Ben?
Just briefly to touch on, first of all, thank you to all those who are active on your city email accounts. I know that it's kind of a pain to use your city email account, but it's very important that you do so. We're trying to protect you from possible Public Records Act exposure, and that's kind of the city clerk's guidelines. If you have any issue with your city email account, I just want to put a public service announcement out that the city's IT division is very talented and is able to help you. I can provide you with a phone number if you reach out to me, and you can call them, identify yourself as a GPAC member, and they'll help you access your email. So if you have any issues, just let me know and we can get you set up with your city email account. The last thing I want to mention is that since our last GPAC meeting, I did set up a central sort of file repository for working drafts. It's on the city's GPAC web page. I thought Chair Gardner was clapping over there, but she's going to fly. You can clap. So I think it's going to be very useful, but I wanted to clarify that the documents that are the reports are only going to be posted on the Newport Together website after the full GPAC has the chance to review them. Until that point, they're in working draft form, and they are available in that repository that we created. So hopefully you find that useful. If you have any problems accessing things, again, I'm trying to be very responsive. If you need any help, just reach out to me at any time. But we have the next steps here. So again, the city email account is very important because we'll be reaching out to coordinate those meetings very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And former Mayor Gardner, Nancy, would you have something that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, it's come up in a number of the subcommittee meetings that one of the problems with the general plan is its implementation. And you can go if you really look at it, it's interesting that you have policies and sometimes they refer you to the implementation aspect and there's not even there. And how they're implemented. And there is an annual report that goes up to the state, but it focuses primarily on the housing element, and it's prepared by staff. So one of the thoughts is to create an extension of this committee that would take an element or two each year and just meet once a year and review that and see if there are any gaps to identify, oh, hey, the city's totally dropped the ball on this. Not to be accusatory, but just to say to the council, hey, here's something that's been missed, and the council says, well, we deliberately wanted to miss it, that's their role. But in bringing it up, staff, Jaime thought that might be a good idea. So I want to bring it forth and suggest, would you like to discuss it at a meeting and have a fuller discussion, or if it's of no interest, then it doesn't have to be brought up.
I, for one, think that's a good idea. It'll connect the
great idea
future past with the past with the present and the future. And Dennis Baker?
Yeah, also that has come up in I think every one of the subcommittees I sit on, that very thing. So definitely supportive of that.
Okay, all right, let's do that. All right, and Susan DeSantis.
This is off topic to some extent, but I just wanted to make an observation. I think some of you were at Speak Up Newport last night for the discussion of the land use element and the housing element. And this is just my own opinion that I think if we are only talking about addressing housing as a state mandate, I find that to be problematic because we're not acknowledging or recognizing that there was a housing emergency that was declared at the state level. There are housing issues that the city of Newport Beach has for its workforce housing, for its seniors, and others, and that was not acknowledged. It's like we're singing to the choir if we are only talking to those who think there is not an issue here, that we are only responding because of a state mandate. So I just wanted to say that. I don't know if anyone else agrees or has that point of view, but it was an opportunity to educate the community about some of the housing issues that we do have that go beyond the state mandate.
Thank you, Susan, for raising our awareness of that. I'm sure that we'll probably take it away this evening and we can bring it back at another meeting again so that we can address it in more detail. Maybe take another deep dive. Ben?
Well, just to further it for a minute, it does have to do with the messaging. So I'm not aware actually of how we are messaging some of the issues in the general plan that go beyond just talking about what the general plan is. And as part of the social media toolkit, are there talking points?
Yes, as part of that toolkit, we'll have included for the GPAC almost like an FAQ or like different topics that might arise. And one of them that we are trying to use consistent language with the website is on the land use and housing element too, and how that is communicated out as well.
And then if I could add to that, I know in a previous meeting it was brought up about a fact sheet, and that is something that staff is working on preparing. I think just like we've seen with the pyramid of engagement, you'll have people who you share that FAQ response with about, you know, the parallel track of the land use element and the importance of the housing element, but that's something separate from the comprehensive general plan update in a sense. And then you'll have the people who really want to lean in and learn more about the housing element and the nexus of the RENA and the requirements. So that will be provided to the GPAC at a future date. But for now, you will have the FAQ to help address that comment in some respect.
If I may, one more observation, that there was a very excellent, I thought, presentation made by our general plan steering committee chair, Nancy Gardner, and that we, in my mind, those are the talking points that we should be using from the SPON presentation. I think there's a missed opportunity if we don't provide some education to our community as we're looking at the general plan and these issues.
Thank you, Susan, for raising our awareness of that. Other comments? Mr. Mosher, and then we need to move on. Go ahead.
Yes, regarding the implementation plan, in the for those who are interested in that report, there is a link to it in the last page of my written comments, which were submitted and circulated through the, they were not submitted, but they were circulated through the correct email account to the members, and we have the copy here, but the electronic one you can click on. And so the current report for last year on the status of the implementation, you can find currently as item 3 from the March 7th Planning Commission meeting, and it will be going to the City Council on Tuesday, so tomorrow night there will be a link to the latest version, which is probably the same as this. And although it is devoted mostly to housing, it does report on the status of each and every one of the implementation programs that we have in the general plan, and it gives an example of something that was done towards that implementation during the last year. The problem is that each implementation program is used to implement many different policies, and there are policies that no implementation action has been taken on, and you can't see that. The reason for this comment is there was one report done the other way where it went through the policies of an element, which was the safety element, and the staff was asked, has any of this been implemented? And a matrix was produced for the safety subcommittee in that direction, showing each safety policy what was the status of its current implementation. And so I'm wondering if that report is still available and can be recovered. I think Jaime worked on that, and it would be very good for it to be recovered and put in this repository that we have.
Yes, I see that as very much related to the comment that Chair Gardner brought up in terms of how we are held accountable in a sense to implementing the policies as they're written. And I would say that we do still have that matrix that you're referencing, and we could certainly add it to the repository earlier than otherwise would be. It'll definitely be added when the safety, existing conditions and background analysis report is brought to that subcommittee as kind of the pre-existing work that subcommittee did. But I can make a point to put that in the repository. That's no problem. Just for the record, so what I'm hearing is it sounds like there's at least enough interest to bring the issue of how do we kind of bring some form of the GPAC or an extension of the GPAC in the future into the annual progress report kind of exercise to make sure that the various subcommittees have a voice to ensure that if something is overlooked, that is something that the subcommittee can report out for council consideration. So that'll be something that we can bring in a future meeting. And then Committee Member DeSantis, your comment is well put, and that is something we can take into consideration with the materials provided to the GPAC members.
Thank you, Ben. Okay. Moving on to our next meeting that would be scheduled the first Wednesday of the month. Ben?
So we have been trying to stick to the first Wednesday of each month. That would be April 3rd. That's a very quick turnaround for any productive work to occur. And I don't know about you all, but I would hate to convene this committee to just meet for the sake of meeting. So staff's recommendation, unless there are any objection, would be to forgo an April meeting and focus on the subcommittee meetings that you see here. And we can provide electronic updates to the full committee as these subcommittees convene to let you know that these reports are available in the repository. So that would be 3 subcommittees that would be convening to review 3 reports and then to start a discussion on the noise element. And then we would come back in the first Wednesday of May to reconvene the full GPAC. We'd have those reports and possibly, as long as we don't think it's too much, the discussion on the implementation and the extension of GPAC. So that would be staff's recommendation unless there's any objection from the GPAC today.
Objections, and that would be, the date would be May 1st. No, yes, May 1st. I think it was. Okay, no objections? All right, Ben. Thank you, Ben. Okay, motion to adjourn. I'd like to just leave you with a comment. I know I was rushing it along a little tonight. I've been asked to do that in consideration of your time and not to lose you in the long run, because this was our first really progress report of everything that will be going on the site. And this will just continue to move us down. I'll continue to move us down the line a little more quickly, pursuant to the city's asking me to do so as well.
Just to clarify, again, we want to be respectful of your time. The intent is not to stifle conversation. If there was a lively conversation occurring, we'd gladly stay here until 8:30, 9 o'clock, although my kids will hate me for that. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you all for your input, and enjoy your spring holiday. Thank you.